feels like it's been a while since we recorded, but for our listeners, it's probably sort of been extra consistent recently, not that long.
Yeah. We're posting every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. Yeah, we actually haven't really mentioned that, but that's like our goal for 2023 is to post every 2 weeks, like be really consistent with it. So you guys always have content to listen to. We're going to talk about the DAO today, not just any DAO, but the DAO, the infamous DAO that collapsed in 2016. Pretty colossal event in the crypto world, both for the size of the collapse and also for the effect that it had on Ethereum, the Ethereum blockchain in particular. We'll get into that in a minute, but how are you going, Nikita?
I'm going well. I'm very busy with blockchain related stuff, and I went to DevCon. Not sure if I mentioned that in the last podcast, but there was Ethereum DevCon in Tokyo. Now I've just signed up to another hackathon with like the Polygon blockchain, which is sort of related to Ethereum. So yeah, it's stressing me out, but like it's self-inflicted pain.
Oh my gosh, why stress?
I have so much to do, like just, busy. But you're busy too.
I am. I've been quite busy. I've just started doing my profs, which I'm not sure if I would have said in the last podcast. So that's exciting, getting through that. And then once I'm done with profs, which for anyone who's like not in New Zealand or doesn't know anything about the law industry, it's basically like the equivalent of the American bar. So once I've done that in a few months, I'll officially be a barrister and solicitor of the High Court of New Zealand. So that'll be good. But yeah. Shall we get into it?
Yeah. Do we want to explain what a DAO is?
Yeah, maybe it's a good thing to start with.
Okay.
So a DAO is spelt DAO, and it's all capitalized because it stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, which is a real mouthful and sounds really confusing, but when we break it down, it's pretty chill. We'll be able to understand what it is. So basically a DAO is an organization that's run by a set of rules that are encoded on the blockchain. And usually they're for a specific purpose. So to give an example of what you could use a DAO for, you could use a DAO for buying real estate or venture capital, which is what the DAO did. And there's many, like basically anything, any purpose you want to do to affect a purpose as a collective rather than an individual, you can use a DAO to do that. An important element of a DAO is that the organization is decentralized, just like everything in crypto. Well, we know it's not everything in crypto, but in theory, everything's decentralized. And so once the rules are set in place for the DAO, they are enforced by the nodes on the blockchain. But essentially, once the DAO is set up and organized, the users have voting rights, but they don't have any governance rights as such.
Yeah, for example, I had a friend who wanted to create a DAO to manage the apartment complex he was in. So in terms of voting for like what plants go in the hallway or like when the elevators need renovation, he wanted to use the DAO to like make everyone vote on those changes. So yeah, that's something that can be really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea of them kind of becoming more common. I don't necessarily know if they've been incorporated in many places, in many industries quite ubiquitously yet. At A, probably needs some more public buy-in and some more public awareness, and B, probably just to drill down on people's knowledge and skills in creating DAOs. And also, I feel like you have to, for any organization or any rules, you have to have people who want to follow them, I suppose. So
yeah, I think that's definitely the hardest obstacle with implementing DAOs is like people don't know how they work. And I think like getting into this DAO, they conveniently named it the DAO. So it is actually, it's very inconvenient because you can, it's hard to know which one we're talking about. Are we talking about the concept or the DAO? So the DAO was something that was created in 2016 by two brothers, and another Ethereum developer in Europe. So the two brothers, their last name was Gents, and I'm probably messing that up, so I'm not going to say it much this episode, but it's Jentzch.
Pop it up on the screen.
Yeah. And they founded a company called Slockit. And the idea behind Slockit was to unlock things like your bike or your telephone by making transactions on the Ethereum network. So Slockit stood for smart lock. And I guess one thing to kind of describe how this worked was if you made a transaction, you could turn something on. So I seen like a transaction to Sophie, and then that would somehow turn her lights on or something, or do something cool. And so if you think about bike sharing or scooter sharing or even cars, this is kind of cool. You can kind of send a transaction to the company and then the car will turn on or something. So I think it's kind of a clever idea. The brothers, they wanted some venture capital to kind of help their company, and they thought, well, why not use this new concept of a DAO that Vitalik had created and create like a venture fund for Ethereum applications. And so they created the DAO, and they started working on the idea around late 2015, and then it was finally launched around 2016. So that is kind of the basic history of how the DAO was made.
Yeah, and they raised around 150 million US dollars worth of Ethereum. Yeah, that's right. I'm just making sure that I've got the right figure.
There's quite a big story on that. Christoph Gents thought that the DAO would only raise about $5 million. There were lots of arguments between the developers, maybe not arguments, but discussions about like whether to cap the DAO funding, because if there's any risk with the DAO, then, you know, the stakes are really high. So yeah, there were lots of discussions about whether to cap the DAO, but ultimately they decided that it's not going to be that popular. It's not going to be super crazy. They just thought maybe 5 million max that they would potentially raise. But on the first day, they raised $4.2 million. So the crowdfunding period was 28 days throughout May 2016. By May 28, they had, $139.4 million, and they were just really overwhelmed. And I think at this point, Christoph Gent, he sort of regretted making the DAO. He felt it was like a beast that had kind of gotten out of his control. And there are stories of him just kind of being isolated in his house and just like feeling almost a little depressed, detached from the whole thing, because even though they had given the code of the DAO to many Ethereum developers, including Vitalik, and they'd like really looked through the code properly, they were still like a little bit scared because this was like the first really, really big DAO.
I also feel like maybe, I mean, it shouldn't affect how you draft a code and how much attention and effort you put into it. But I suppose if there is a fund that's being raised that's only expected to cap at about $5 million and it exceeds that by almost, well, more than triple, then perhaps your worries about security and the effort that you would have put into coding the DAO in the first place would have been maybe a bit more stringent. I don't know, but yeah, I would say that if you're dealing with 150 million, there's probably going to be a few more people that code went across their desk, you know?
Absolutely. And then on May 27, so just before the crowd sale ended, so the crowd sale ended on May 28, there was a Cornell professor named Gun, and I'm probably also messing that up too, J-U with a thingy, I'll put it on the screen. He published a paper called A Call for a Temporary Moratorium on the DAO. And so in this paper, he described 7 potential attack vectors on the DAO that, you know, could happen. And so he publicly released this paper, and then he went to the New York Times and like publicized his paper. And so the New York Times wrote a column called Paper Points Out Flaw in Venture Fund Based on Virtual Money on May 27 as well. And so what is just crazy about this is that this professor who, along with a couple of Ethereum developers and entrepreneurs, thought about the potential attack vectors and publicized it, which is like literally the most stupid thing. But yeah, and then he apparently messaged the other coders of the DAO and told them about this, but everyone was like, why did you just explain like the potential ways of hacking the DAO? Anyway, that aside, that was kind of the first real security warning of the DAO. And shortly after, there was another DAO called MakerDAO that they found a vulnerability. They hacked themselves, and then so they could make some of the money safe. The DAO creators, this is about early June. The DAO creators, they found some vulnerabilities in the DAO, and then they made a post on, I think it was June 12th, that they had identified the potential risks and they were had implemented a fix. Actually, no, they had made a fix and it was on its way to be fine. And Vitalik supported this, saying that I have been buying DAO tokens since the security news. And so he posted this in a tweet on June 12th. So everyone thought it was maybe okay. But the thing is that with the DAO, there's usually a cooling off period with the voting. So there was a 2 week, I think, or 2 week to 4 week voting period where basically members of the DAO had to vote on these changes to fix the code. So they weren't able to really implement the fixes they needed in time. Immediately, yeah. Yeah, and then on June 16, someone started attacking the DAO and siphoning out hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. Yeah.
That's insane. I feel like it's a really interesting point that you raised with the professor from Cornell who published his basically the attack vectors that were potentially available. I think it's a really interesting point that you raised there, because in some ways posting a way to hack a DAO or anything to extract a whole lot of money from it, you would not be able to do that if it was for a bank. That would surely be a criminal offense, some sort of conspiracy or something. I don't know. Not a criminal lawyer.
So the hacker was siphoning out money, and I guess people would ask how did this work? And so he made a child DAO, and he kind of was just pulling out money and over and over and over. And the way that Laura Shin, who is a crypto journalist, highly recommend her book, which describes a lot about the DAO. She describes it as having $101 in your bank and then withdrawing $100, and then the bank balance doesn't update. So you can keep withdrawing $100 over and over. So this is like a glitch in the code, and that's basically what the hacker was able to do with a smart contract of the DAO, and he could just keep extracting money. So yeah, that's how it worked. And for developers who are listening to this, there's something that you probably want to check out called checks, effects, interactions, which if you just Google it, it will come up. And this is just something that the whole community learned, is that this is one of the main things you have to be careful of when you're programming a smart contract, is to make sure that the balances are being updated every time. Otherwise, this hack can happen. I mean, it has happened not just in the DAO, but in several other instances. So this is like a number one security thing you have to be aware of. So I'll put a link in the description.
We've talked about how the DAO hack happened, and I think another important thing to talk about is the implications for the Ethereum community, because they were also quite revolutionary, I would say. So the DAO resulted eventually in something called a hard fork, which is when the blockchain, when Vitalik basically sanctioned the duplication of the Ethereum blockchain and moved all of the assets over to this new blockchain, and basically took it back one transaction to remove the DAO hack. Only happened once in Ethereum's history, and hopefully will never have to happen again, because it's obviously an incredibly tedious process and kind of, I think, cuts into the decentralization aspect. Obviously, Vitalik took central control of Ethereum for that purpose, which is not ideal, but in this situation necessary to save all this money for these people who are none the wiser, I guess. But I think what I'd love you to explain, Nikita, is what the options were prior to deciding to do the Ethereum hard fork.
So a hard fork was a huge decision, and many people in the crypto community were saying that if you do a hard fork, then Ethereum is basically dead meat, because no one's going to trust in it anymore. It's like going against the central tenets of decentralization, as Sophie explained. First, there were developers who tried to white hack the DAO, because the hacker of the DAO didn't manage to get all of the funds. There was still about 70 million left, if I can remember correctly. And so they attacked that DAO, and they were using it to protect other people's funds. And so they successfully managed to do that. But then other people came in and started attacking that child DAO that had all the rescued funds in it. And so it was just kind of like they could just see it was going to, yeah, it was just going to be like infinite attacking into like child DAOs, and it was just never going to end. So the next option was doing a soft fork, which is basically like upgrading the rules of the blockchain, making some transactions invalid in the past. So in other words, it's kind of like a software upgrade. It's not quite, but yeah, it's basically a software upgrade to the Ethereum blockchain. So they really, really wanted to do that, but it was quite a complex process. And just before they were going to do the soft fork, they got an email from, I think it was Gun again, and he had an undergraduate. There was an undergraduate student at Cornell and a high school student who had identified like a denial of service attack vector on this soft fork upgrade. And so they were like, okay, we can't do this. But at this point, it was just the time pressure was on, and yeah, their last resort was to do a hard fork, but this was basically the only way that they could save most of the Ethereum that investors had lost from the attack. So they hard forked to a new Ethereum blockchain. So they just created an entirely new blockchain, and they copied the addresses of the original DAO investors and gave them like an allocation of Ethereum. So now those original DAO investors are very rich in Ethereum and ETH, ETH, not Ethereum. And they obviously didn't copy over the hackers' stolen funds, and so the hacker doesn't have ETH on the new Ethereum blockchain, which is the Ethereum blockchain as we know it. And the old blockchain, like the original blockchain, I think that's now called Ethereum Cash. Is that right? I don't know. Ethereum Cash. Ethereum Lite.
Ethereum Cash. I don't know. We'll have to.
I think it's like ETC. Anyway. Maybe, maybe I'm wrong on that, but anyway.
Oh, well, if we are, we can just check it out.
This hard fork was like really, really controversial, and I think a lot of original Ethereum lovers and proponents of Ethereum, they actually started developing new blockchains because they were like, we can't trust Ethereum anymore. Like it was such a contentious issue, and to this day, like this hard fork is going to be talked about and forever. Like it really is monumental in sort of a bad way, but yeah.
I mean, I think it is a double-edged sword, because obviously they've managed to save these people's funds and protect a bad actor from having their way, essentially. But I also think it speaks more to the the fact that all of these experts who had the DAO code come across their desk and checked it and were fine with it and didn't identify any of these things, you kind of wonder whether there's enough care being taken in the first instance.
I think one of the main key lessons, I think, from the DAO that Ethereum really stresses, including Vitalik, is that if you're making an application or funding something like this, please cap it. Like, don't until it's gone through months and months of testing, and then maybe you can expand it, but like cap it so that the losses aren't super bad if something does go wrong. And the second thing is, just following Ethereum security standards. I think the DAO hack in a way was good, and it taught a lot of people about how to properly code a smart contract. So it was a really good learning experience, and I think most Ethereum developers or blockchain developers now learn a lot from this hack because it really emphasized a lot. Yeah,
absolutely. Like, I suppose the DAO hackers have never been captured. Do we have any hot, spicy theories as to who the DAO hackers may have been?
Yes, and this credit goes to, again, Laura Shin. She runs a podcast called Unchained, and she wrote a book called Cryptopians, and she theorizes that the hacker was a guy called Toby Honish.
Lots of difficult names, this pod.
Yeah, it's all these Europeans. Jesus Christ. And he was the CEO of a blockchain company called 10x. And he also made some really questionable posts on Twitter. And anyway, long story short, they managed to unscramble some of the transactions that the original hacker had made and kind of trace back the coins that he had put through coin mixers. So there's a coin mixer called Wasabi, exchange mixing place called Wasabi, and they managed to kind of reverse engineer a few things. And they found a lot of connections to this domain name called Toby.ai. And this was like a username he frequently used. This was like his email that he used at Toby.ai. So that was like something very obvious. And then Toby was also making really questionable posts online around the time of the hack. And then he sort of went silent afterwards. And then some of his former colleagues kind of described him as being really obnoxious and having a really high interest in some of the tools that the hacker used to perform the hack. And so if you kind of put all those dots together, I think it's the strongest theory that we have on who the hacker is. And when Laura Shin was about to go public with this information in her book, she reached out to Toby, asking him if he had any comment on these allegations. She gave him a Google Doc with all her research and all the evidence. And he emailed back saying, all of this is untrue. I will provide you with all the counterpoints to all this nonsense. And then he never got back to her. And he just went dead silent. So red flags.
Red flags all round. Wow. Props to Laura Shin. That's amazing that she was able to. So this is all in her book, The Cryptopians.
Yeah, I think I'm going to actually post it on the CryptoGirls website as a reading recommendation because it's not too technical and it really gives a good insight into the community, the Ethereum community.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. That was very informative. I learned a lot. You definitely took the anchor on that. On this podcast, but I was happy to be informed and I am so excited. I think I'm going to order this book. Well, thank you very much. I hope everyone who's listening learned a bit more about DAOs and the DAO. And I think for now, this is our last planned scam series episode. We may do more in the future, but I think it's probably a good time to round it off. We've done quite a few episodes now. I think it's on to bigger and better things for us.
Yeah. We're excited to get more people to interview on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I think this has been a good kind of, I mean, it's autumn now, but it's been a good summer series. We've been doing it over the summer.
Yeah. No, I'm ready to get on to the more positive things. There's lots of exciting things happening in the blockchain world. Things are getting better. People are learning. Yeah. So looking forward to it.
All right.
Okay.
Signing off.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.